Welcome to our channel. The world stage is constantly shifting, with numerous significant events unfolding daily. Today, we delve into one of the most critical ongoing narratives, the escalating economic confrontation between the United States and China. This isn't just a headline. It's a complex battle with profound implications for global markets, businesses, and everyday consumers like you and me. We'll break down the latest developments, explore the historical context, analyze the motivations of the key players, and examine the real-world consequences. Stay tuned, as we'll provide a comprehensive overview and offer concluding thoughts at the end of this analysis. The situation is dynamic, and understanding its nuances is crucial. Good morning. A significant development in the ongoing trade tensions. Chinese tariffs on U.S. goods are set to experience a dramatic increase. Starting tomorrow, these levies will jump from the current 34% to a staggering 84%. This sharp escalation marks a serious intensification of the trade conflict between the world's two largest economies. Beijing's Ministry of Commerce has reacted strongly, accusing the Trump administration of employing blackmail tactics. They characterize the U.S. tariffs as a typical example of unilateral bullying practices, signaling a deepening rift and a hardening of stances on both sides. This latest move underscores the volatility and high stakes involved in this global economic standoff. The struggle for global supremacy between the United States and China has moved far beyond the realms of traditional diplomacy and ideological debate. It's a conflict playing out in real time, its tremors felt across international financial markets, critical shipping routes, and the very fabric of national economic policies. This economic battleground is characterized by strategic maneuvering, retaliatory actions, and rhetoric that keeps global observers on edge. The consequences are tangible, creating ripple effects that extend from the high-powered trading floors of Wall Street to the agricultural heartlands of rural towns. Technology giants and individual farmers alike are finding themselves caught in the crossfire, their futures increasingly tied to the decisions made in Washington and Beijing. The uncertainty generated by this confrontation impacts investment decisions, supply chain stability, and consumer prices worldwide, demonstrating the interconnectedness of the modern global economy and the far-reaching consequences of disputes between major powers. At the epicenter of this high-stakes geopolitical drama stand two formidable leaders, Donald Trump and Xi Jinping. Each wields immense power and influence, utilizing every available tool, from tariffs and trade negotiations to regulatory actions and diplomatic pressure, in an effort to reshape the existing global order to better suit their nation's perceived advantages and strategic interests. Their actions are not merely reactive. They represent calculated moves in a complex chess game where the rules are constantly being rewritten. The decisions made by these leaders reverberate globally, influencing international relations, economic forecasts, and the strategic calculations of nations large and small. The intense focus on their interactions and policy announcements reflects their pivotal roles in determining the trajectory of this defining conflict of the 21st century, a conflict whose outcome will undoubtedly shape the future landscape of international trade and power dynamics. Please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the like button. Your support is incredibly important for helping us grow and continue bringing you detailed analyses like this. Also, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from our global audience. And make sure to watch this video until the very end, as we'll be summarizing the key takeaways and offering our concluding thoughts on this complex situation. The ripple effects of this escalating trade conflict are being keenly felt across the economic spectrum. From the bustling financial districts symbolized by Wall Street to the quiet farmlands of rural communities, the impact is undeniable. Technology companies, often reliant on intricate global supply chains involving both the U.S. and China, face disruptions and rising costs. Similarly, farmers, particularly those producing commodities like soybeans that have been targeted by retaliatory tariffs, experience significant market volatility and economic hardship. This demonstrates how interconnected seemingly disparate sectors of the economy are, and how actions taken at the highest levels of government can have direct and often challenging consequences for businesses and individuals far removed from the centers of power. The uncertainty breeds caution, leading to delayed investments and hiring freezes, further dampening economic activity. During a Republican fundraising dinner held last night, President Trump presented an optimistic view of the situation, asserting that dozens of countries were actively seeking trade deals with the United States. He portrayed these nations as eager, even begging, to negotiate agreements, suggesting that the administration's tariff strategy was yielding positive results by bringing trading partners to the table. This statement came as new tariffs were scheduled to take effect today, highlighting the administration's continued reliance on levies as a primary tool in its trade policy. President Trump emphasized that countries prefer not to face tariffs themselves, framing the situation as one where the U.S. holds significant leverage. He stated, "It's very simple. We're making deals, and people are paying tariffs," suggesting a dual outcome where either agreements are reached or tariff revenue is collected, both presented as beneficial to the U.S. However, this perspective contrasts sharply with the atmosphere in global financial markets. The ongoing trade tensions have fostered an environment of heightened uncertainty and volatility, which has increasingly become the accepted norm. Financial markets are reacting with significant swings to each new development, reflecting deep-seated concerns about the potential for further escalation and the broader impact on global economic growth. Investors are grappling with ambiguity, making long-term planning difficult. One senior executive from BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager overseeing assets exceeding $11 trillion, described the current moment as profoundly unstable. This assessment from a major financial institution underscores the seriousness with which the markets view the situation, highlighting the lack of clarity regarding the future direction of tariff policies. The core unknown, as this executive pointed out, revolves around how high the tariffs will ultimately go, and, crucially, how long these measures will remain in place, casting a long shadow over global economic prospects. While financial markets might occasionally exhibit brief moments of optimism, perhaps tilting into positive territory on certain days driven by rumors of progress or temporary lulls in rhetoric, the overarching sentiment remains decidedly fragile. These fleeting green days on the stock market charts do little to dispel the underlying anxiety that permeates global trade. The fundamental uncertainty about the duration and extent of the tariff conflict keeps investors wary and businesses hesitant. This inherent fragility was starkly demonstrated again today, with a significant announcement from China's finance ministry. In a direct retaliatory move, Beijing declared it would substantially raise tariffs on essentially all U.S. goods. The increase is dramatic, pushing the tariff rate from the existing 34% up to a staggering 84%. This significant escalation by Beijing represents a clear and substantial blow to any American company attempting to sell its products into the vast Chinese market, which remains one of the world's largest and most important consumer bases. The move was explicitly framed as a direct response to President Trump's recent increase in tariffs levied on Chinese imports. These U.S. tariffs, it should be noted, now stand at a minimum level of 104%, creating significant cost barriers for goods flowing from China to the U.S. China's counteraction, raising its own tariffs to 84%, immediately sent another powerful shockwave rippling through already nervous global financial markets. The tit-for-tat nature of these tariff hikes intensifies the economic pain on both sides and signals a dangerous deepening of the trade conflict, making a swift resolution appear increasingly distant and amplifying concerns about a protracted global economic slowdown. The immediate market reaction to China's announcement was predictable and sharp. U.S. stock index futures experienced a significant drop, reflecting investor fears about the impact of these heightened tariffs on corporate profits and overall economic activity. The negative sentiment wasn't confined to the United States. Germany's DAX index also fell steeply. This synchronized downturn across major international markets serves as a potent reminder of just how deeply interconnected the global economy has become. Events in one major economy inevitably trigger reactions in others, demonstrating that trade disputes between giants like the U.S. and China have far-reaching consequences. The sensitivity of markets to these headline shifts underscores the precariousness of the current situation and the potential for rapid, widespread economic disruption if tensions continue to escalate without a clear path toward de-escalation and resolution. This dramatic increase in Chinese tariffs isn't merely an abstract number on a government ledger. It represents a massive shift with severe, tangible, real-world consequences for a wide array of American businesses. Virtually every American company engaged in commerce with China, spanning sectors from consumer goods manufacturing to heavy industrial production, is now confronted with a dramatically more challenging and costly economic environment. The newly imposed 84% tariffs will inevitably increase operational costs, making U.S. products significantly more expensive for Chinese consumers and businesses. This, in turn, will limit sales potential within the lucrative Chinese market, and is highly likely to translate into lower profits for affected American firms, potentially leading to job cuts and reduced investment back home. The breadth of the impact underscores the significant economic integration between the two nations and the disruptive power of such aggressive tariff measures. Beyond the immediate tariff hikes, Beijing has signaled its intent to pursue further action. It has confirmed that it is taking the Trump administration's tariff measures to the World Trade Organization, WTO, seeking formal international arbitration over the dispute. While the WTO's dispute resolution process is typically lengthy and its enforcement mechanisms have limitations, this move represents a formal challenge to the legality of the U.S. actions under international trade law. Furthermore, Chinese officials have dropped hints that additional retaliatory measures could be forthcoming. These might include non-tariff barriers, such as increased regulatory scrutiny on U.S. companies operating in China, customs delays, or potentially leveraging China's significant holdings of U.S. debt, although the feasibility and impact of the latter remain highly debated among economists. These veiled threats add another layer of uncertainty and risk for American businesses with exposure to the Chinese market. Analysts observing the unfolding situation note that China often employs a strategic, multi-pronged approach in trade disputes. We frequently overlook the fact that leaders like Chinese President Xi Jinping, while not subject to the same democratic electoral pressures as Western leaders, are nonetheless deeply concerned about their political legitimacy and historical legacy. Actions perceived as weak or yielding excessively to foreign pressure can undermine their standing within the Communist Party and among the populace. In this context, President Trump's aggressive tariff strategy has, arguably, put Xi Jinping in a difficult position. As noted by observers and correspondents, there's a sense that Beijing is now girding for a prolonged fight, feeling compelled to demonstrate resolve and push back against what it perceives as unilateral pressure from Washington. This dynamic makes finding a mutually agreeable off-ramp more challenging, as domestic political considerations intertwine with economic strategy. Furthermore, China has recently expanded its arsenal of retaliatory tools by adding 6 U.S. entities to its unreliable entity list and another 12 to its export control list. These designations, while potentially sounding bureaucratic, carry serious implications for the targeted companies. Being placed on these lists means that these American firms can face significant restrictions, or even outright bans, on trading with Chinese companies, investing in China, or exporting certain goods. Typically, such measures target businesses involved in trade related to sensitive areas, such as arms sales to Taiwan, activities concerning Hong Kong's autonomy, or the transfer of technologies deemed politically or strategically contentious by Beijing. In some instances, individuals connected to these blacklisted companies could also face personal sanctions, including visa restrictions or asset freezes within Chinese jurisdiction, further escalating the personal and corporate risks associated with the trade conflict. China is acutely aware that it cannot perfectly match U.S. tariffs on a dollar-for-dollar basis. This asymmetry stems from the simple fact that China exports significantly more goods to the United States than the U.S. exports to China. Therefore, Beijing has less value of U.S. imports upon which to levy retaliatory tariffs compared to the vast amount of Chinese goods the U.S. can target. However, this imbalance doesn't leave China without options. Beijing possesses other forms of economic leverage it can potentially deploy. One prominent example is agriculture. The U.S. agricultural sector, heavily reliant on exports to China, was hit hard during previous rounds of tariffs, causing significant economic pain in politically important rural states. If the Chinese government were to decide to target U.S. agricultural products once again, a possibility hinted at by state media outlets, it would directly impact President Trump's political base in rural America, potentially creating domestic pressure on the administration. This tactic reinforces the perception that the trade war is not merely an economic dispute, but also carries significant personal and political dimensions for the leaders involved. Simultaneously, China is attempting to turn this crisis into a strategic opportunity. In recent meetings, President Xi Jinping has explicitly stated that China will actively work to expand trade relationships with its neighboring countries, placing particular emphasis on the nations within Southeast Asia. This includes countries like Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. These nations have themselves been caught in the crossfire of U.S. tariffs, particularly those aimed at disrupting supply chains originating in China. As costs rise and access to the U.S. market becomes less certain for these countries due to American protectionist measures, China's outreach and offers of expanded trade become potentially more attractive. By strengthening economic ties within its immediate region, China could partially cushion the blow from reduced trade with the United States, and perhaps more strategically, begin to reshape regional supply chains to be less reliant on Western markets in the long term. This strategic pivot is accompanied by a shift in rhetoric from Chinese state media, which has adopted a more assertive and even mocking tone. Official outlets have highlighted what they portray as other countries begging the United States for tariff exemptions, contrasting this perceived supplication with China's own stance of resistance. From Beijing's perspective, President Trump's strategy appears to be an attempt to pick off countries individually, forcing them into bilateral deals that favor the U.S., rather than adhering to established multilateral trade frameworks like the World Trade Organization. China, conversely, continues to publicly position itself as a staunch supporter of global rules-based trade. This message is calculated to resonate, particularly with developing nations that may feel squeezed or unfairly targeted by U.S. protectionist policies, potentially allowing China to cast itself as a champion of the existing global order, even as it seeks to modify it to its advantage. All of these trade-related maneuvers are occurring within an economic environment already fraught with uncertainty. Global companies, intricately reliant on complex multinational supply chains built up over decades, are feeling the heat of this instability. Consider the example of Boeing's 737 aircraft. Each plane is a complex assembly, composed of roughly 2,000 major parts sourced from approximately 700 different suppliers spread across the globe. The wings might come from Japan, the fuselage could be constructed in Italy, certain doors manufactured in Canada, and the crucial engines supplied by Britain's Rolls-Royce. The idea, often suggested by President Trump, of reshoring, bringing all of this production back to the United States, is a monumental task. Experts estimate it would take years, if not decades, and cost billions upon billions of dollars to replicate such intricate and specialized global supply networks domestically. In the interim, before any large-scale reshoring could possibly occur, the imposition of higher tariffs simply increases the cost of doing business for companies like Boeing and countless others. Airlines, such as Ryanair, which has dozens of Boeing aircraft currently on order, could now face substantial additional import fees, potentially totaling over £400 million sterling. These increased costs are unlikely to be absorbed solely by the airlines. Inevitably, they will be passed on to consumers in the form of higher air travel prices. This illustrates how tariffs, even when aimed at specific goods or countries, can cascade through the economy, ultimately affecting the prices ordinary people pay for goods and services, adding to inflationary pressures and reducing purchasing power. And the impact isn't limited to the aviation industry. The ripple effects of the U.S.-China trade conflict touch nearly every aspect of the modern economy. From the smartphones in our pockets and the televisions in our living rooms, to the cars we drive and the clothes we wear, global industries have been built on decades of integrated trade networks. Unraveling these complex relationships overnight, as some rhetoric might suggest, is practically impossible without causing significant disruption and economic pain. As uncertainty about trade policy persists and escalates, companies worldwide are hitting the pause button. Investment plans are being shelved, new projects are delayed, and hiring decisions are put on hold. People are less willing to switch jobs. Businesses hesitate to expand factories, and the general pace of economic activity slows down as caution prevails over confidence. According to analyses from major financial institutions like BlackRock and other respected financial observers, this pervasive hesitancy is the real underlying threat stemming from the trade war. Economies thrive on momentum and predictability. When uncertainty dominates, stagnation tends to set in, creating a drag on growth that can lead to longer-term negative consequences far exceeding the immediate impact of the tariffs themselves. These consequences can include reduced innovation, slower productivity growth, and a general decline in economic dynamism, affecting prosperity for years to come. The constant back-and-forth rhetoric and policy shifts create an environment where businesses cannot plan effectively, leading to a self-reinforcing cycle of caution and reduced economic activity. Behind all the tariff announcements, market fluctuations, and press conference statements lie the real-world impacts on families, workers, and business owners who are struggling to navigate an increasingly uncertain global landscape. In communities across the United States, from Virginia to the Heartland and throughout the manufacturing belt, there is palpable anxiety. Many individuals initially supported Donald Trump, hoping his aggressive stance on trade would revitalize American industry, safeguard jobs, and compel countries like China to adopt fairer trade practices. They believed that confronting perceived imbalances was necessary, even if it involved some short-term disruption, trusting that the end result would be a stronger American economy with a more level global playing field. However, for now, the most visible and immediate results for many have been rising costs for everyday goods, increased volatility in markets impacting savings and retirement accounts, and a pervasive sense of economic fragility. Take the example of Gabriel, a nurse and mother of a 2-year-old, who recently shared that the rising cost of living, exacerbated by trade tensions, has forced her to take on extra shifts just to cover essential expenses. Prices for necessities, particularly imported baby goods and common household items often sourced from Asia and Europe, are steadily creeping upward, directly impacting family budgets. These items now carry additional costs linked directly or indirectly to the ongoing trade conflict, squeezing households already dealing with tight finances. The pinch is real and widespread. Then there's the experience of Jim, a construction worker, who reports watching the cost of essential raw materials like timber and steel rise dramatically, even before the most recent tariff escalations took full effect. While he expresses continued belief in the president's overall plan, he acknowledges that these price hikes are directly affecting his work, making projects more expensive and impacting his customers' ability to afford necessary construction and renovations. Everything from basic building supplies to fixtures and fittings now costs more, complicating project timelines and budgets. While Jim remains hopeful that prices will eventually stabilize in the long run, his current reality, like that of many workers caught in the middle, is one of increasing costs and economic pressure. Beyond these anecdotal stories, broader economic indicators paint a sobering picture. Stock markets have reacted sharply, and often negatively, to every announcement of new tariffs or retaliatory measures, reflecting widespread investor nervousness. Pensions, retirement accounts, and personal savings invested in the market have experienced volatility and, in many cases, taken significant hits as overall confidence erodes. Investors are wary, business leaders remain cautious, and consumers, especially those nearing retirement or on fixed incomes, are increasingly worried about what the future holds. Even prominent tech leaders, once seen as potential allies of the administration due to shared interests in innovation, are now expressing concern and criticism. Elon Musk, for instance, once viewed somewhat as a Trump ally due to shared interests in American innovation and industry, has publicly criticized the administration's trade policies. In a notably public dispute, Musk sharply rebuked President Trump's top trade advisor at the time, Peter Navarro, labeling him as someone who, in Musk's words, was dumber than a sack of bricks when it comes to trade policy. This unusually blunt outburst followed Navarro's accusation that Musk and similar CEOs were merely assembling products from inexpensive foreign components, thereby contributing, in Navarro's view, to the U.S. trade deficit, rather than engaging in genuine domestic manufacturing. This public spat highlights a growing divide, not just between the U.S. and China, but also within the American business community, and even potentially within the White House itself, regarding the wisdom and execution of the tariff strategy. While President Trump's core team maintains that the tariffs are a necessary form of shock therapy needed to reset global trade rules in America's favor, other voices, including many within the business and investment communities, remain unconvinced. They point out that the U.S. economy, despite its strengths, is not immune to disruptions in global supply chains, and the current tariff policies are arguably making it harder, not easier, for many American companies to compete internationally. This tension was fully evident during recent congressional hearings on Capitol Hill. Trade advisors faced intense questioning from lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans alike. Some questioned the coherence of the strategy, asking pointedly if the administration had thoroughly considered the potential negative consequences of its actions before implementing them. One senator specifically asked whether there was a detailed long-term plan guiding the tariff implementations, or if the approach was essentially a haphazard, perhaps even incompetent effort thrown together without clear objectives or an understanding of the potential fallout. Others expressed concern about accountability, asking who would be held responsible if the tariff strategy ultimately backfired and caused significant economic damage. When pressed on whether specific exemptions would be granted for industries like textiles, where domestic production capacity is minimal and reliance on imports is high, the administration's response was uncompromising. There would be no exemptions and no delays. The tariffs, they insisted, would proceed as scheduled, regardless of the potential impact on specific sectors or consumers. This inflexible stance has frustrated many lawmakers, particularly those representing districts heavily reliant on international trade, who fear the consequences for small businesses, importers, and local economies could be severe and long-lasting. American consumers are already beginning to feel these consequences directly. From cars and electronics to clothing and food, prices for a wide range of goods are rising. Some of this increase is a direct result of tariffs imposed on imported goods. In other cases, the price hikes stem from the broader uncertainty created by the trade conflict, which drives up shipping and logistics costs throughout the global supply chain. Either way, households across the country are witnessing an erosion of their purchasing power as their dollars buy less than they used to. Manufacturers who depend on imported components to build their products are also facing immense pressure, forcing them to rethink their entire supply chain strategies. In many situations, there simply aren't readily available local alternatives, at least not at the same level of quality or cost-effectiveness. Shifting production networks takes significant time, often years, and substantial investment. In the meantime, production costs inevitably go up, and profits tend to go down, further impacting investment and hiring. This is especially painful for industries operating on thin profit margins. For example, the U.S. auto industry relies on thousands of components sourced globally, many originating from China. These parts are not easily replaceable, and the tariffs result in higher production costs, reduced competitiveness, and ultimately, higher prices for car buyers. Despite these mounting costs and disruptions, President Trump's team insists that the pain is both necessary and temporary. They maintain the belief that once the dust settles from this trade confrontation, the United States will emerge in a stronger, more advantageous position globally. They argue that the tariffs are effectively working by forcing numerous countries, they claim over 70 nations, to contact the White House seeking trade discussions and concessions. According to this viewpoint, the tariff pressure is successfully bringing partners and rivals alike to the negotiating table on terms more favorable to the U.S. However, the reality on the ground appears far more complex and uncertain. International negotiations are notoriously slow and difficult, and there's no guarantee they will yield the results the administration hopes for. In the meantime, the global economy remains on edge, holding its breath with each new development. Even among America's traditional allies, there is growing frustration and concern over the Trump administration's approach. European leaders, for example, have strongly pushed back against being subjected to the same aggressive tariff treatment as strategic competitors like China. They argue that, as close partners with shared values and security interests, they should be collaborating with the U.S. to reform global trade rules collectively, not finding themselves targeted by the very tariffs ostensibly aimed at correcting imbalances elsewhere. In nations like Germany, where the economy is heavily export-oriented, the economic impact of U.S. tariffs and the resulting global trade slowdown has already begun to bite. Factories are seeing orders slow down, exporters are nervous about future market access, and overall confidence in the stability of global trade is fading rapidly. There's also a growing worry about the potential damage to long-standing alliances. Some foreign governments perceive the tariffs not just as economic policy, but as part of a broader, unilateral effort by the Trump administration to reshape the global order by breaking down old partnerships and forcing new bilateral deals dictated by American leverage. While this America-first approach might resonate politically in some domestic circles, it risks isolating the United States at a critical juncture when international cooperation on pressing global issues like climate change, technological standards, and global health security is arguably more important than ever. Meanwhile, in American households, boardrooms, and diners, the question people are increasingly asking is, what is the endgame? What is this disruptive trade strategy ultimately supposed to achieve? And perhaps more critically, who is it actually benefiting? While some continue to believe in the long-term strategic rationale, others worry that the economic damage being inflicted now, through higher prices, lost jobs, market instability, and strained international relationships, could take years or even decades to recover from. The old adage that you can't make an omelet without breaking eggs might contain some truth, but a growing number of Americans are starting to question whether the recipe was ever fully thought out, and whether the potential benefits truly outweigh the immediate and tangible costs being felt across the economy. As each new round of tariffs is announced and each countermeasure arrives from Beijing, the stakes continue to rise, and the path forward remains shrouded in uncertainty. For now, President Trump remains defiant, and his trade officials assert that the administration is resolute in its purpose. They believe the tariffs are working as intended, forcing concessions and bringing countries into line. But with markets wobbling, industries under strain, and voters growing restless, it remains unclear how long that unwavering stance can realistically be maintained. The trade war was intended to level the playing field, but for many Americans right now, it feels like they are the ones footing the increasingly hefty bill. And if prices keep climbing, jobs remain precarious, and investments continue to shrink, that frustration is only likely to intensify. As the global economy holds its collective breath, the next moves in this high-stakes game will be watched intently, not just in the halls of power in Washington and Beijing, but in every household, business, and market already feeling the profound impact of this unprecedented global standoff. Conclusion. As we've explored, the trade conflict between the United States and China is far more than a simple dispute over tariffs. It encompasses deep-seated issues of global economic leadership, national security concerns, domestic political pressures, and fundamentally different visions for the future of international trade. The Trump administration initiated aggressive tariff measures, arguing they were necessary to correct long-standing unfair trade practices by China, protect American jobs, and reassert U.S. economic strength. Beijing responded with its own tariffs and strategic adjustments, including strengthening regional ties and challenging U.S. actions through international bodies, while simultaneously navigating domestic pressures to appear strong. The consequences have been widespread: increased costs for consumers and businesses, significant market volatility impacting savings and investments, disruptions to complex global supply chains, heightened geopolitical tensions, and growing uncertainty across the global economy. While the U.S. administration claims its strategy is working by forcing negotiations, critics both domestically and internationally question the long-term plan, the collateral damage to allies, and the overall impact on global stability and prosperity. China, meanwhile, appears to be leveraging the conflict to accelerate its own goals of technological self-reliance and regional influence. Ultimately, this high-stakes confrontation involves two powerful leaders, Donald Trump and Xi Jinping, operating under different political systems, but both driven by strong nationalist sentiments and strategic calculations. The path forward remains unclear. Whether this period leads to a fundamental restructuring of the global economic order, a protracted period of instability, or an eventual negotiated settlement is yet to be determined. What is certain is that the decisions made by these two nations will continue to have profound and lasting implications, not just for their own economies, but for the entire world. The intricate web of global commerce means that disruptions in one area inevitably ripple outwards, affecting businesses, workers, and families far removed from the initial conflict. The situation demands careful observation and nuanced analysis as it continues to evolve. Thank you for joining us on our channel. We hope this analysis has provided valuable insights. Remember to subscribe and like this video if you found it informative. Let us know your thoughts and where you're watching from in the comments below.